The cane clattered across my kitchen floor as Melissa yanked it from my grip. My arthritic fingers couldn't hold on tight enough. She stood there, all 5 feet 10 inches of her, looking down at me like I was dirt on her expensive shoes. "If you want to move so badly, crawl on your knees," she said, her voice cold as January ice. I felt my legs wobble without the support. 72 years of teaching high school history, and this is what my own daughter thought of me. The wooden cane rolled under the refrigerator, out of reach. My late wife Martha would have been horrified to see her precious daughter treating me this way. My knees buckled slightly, and I grabbed the counter to steady myself. The humiliation burned deeper than any physical pain. I'd raised this woman, paid for her college education, walked her down the aisle at her wedding, and now she wanted me to crawl like an animal. But in that moment, something clicked in my mind. This wasn't just cruelty anymore. This was war. And I hadn't survived 40 years of teaching teenagers without learning how to fight back when pushed too far. That night, I heard Melissa talking on her phone in the next room. She thought I was sleeping, but my hearing was still sharp as a tack. The floorboards creaked as she paced back and forth, her voice getting more animated. "The house needs to be sold within the year," she whispered into the receiver. "He's becoming impossible to manage. I need that money for the kids' college fund, and frankly, he's just taking up space." My blood ran cold. So that explained everything. The sudden visits, the fake concern, the way she looked around my house like she was measuring it for new furniture. She wasn't trying to help me. She was planning to kick me out of my own home, the place where Martha and I had built our life together. I lay there in the darkness, listening to her plot my future like I was already dead. She talked about nursing homes and liquidating assets, reducing my entire life to dollar signs on a balance sheet. But Melissa had made one crucial mistake. She thought her old man was weak and helpless. She was about to learn otherwise. The next morning, Melissa showed up with a stranger in a cheap suit and a briefcase that screamed desperation. She introduced him as Tom Bradley from First National Bank, like I should be impressed by his polyester tie and scuffed shoes. "Mr. Patterson, I understand you're interested in exploring your housing options," he said, pulling out a briefcase full of papers that rustled with false promises. I smiled politely and offered them coffee, playing the confused old man they expected to see. "How do you take it, Mr. Bradley? Cream? Sugar?" I asked, shuffling slowly to the kitchen like my joints were giving me trouble. But I caught every whispered word between them. Probate procedures, quick sale options, power of attorney documents. They thought I was deaf as well as stupid. Melissa kept glancing at me, checking if I was following the conversation. I let my eyes glaze over and nodded whenever they paused, like I couldn't keep up with their sophisticated financial talk. The banker spread contracts across my dining table, pointing at signature lines with his gold-plated pen like he was doing me a huge favor. But I was listening to everything, filing it all away for later use. After they left, I went to my bedroom and pulled out an old leather notebook from my teaching days. The pages were yellow with age, but the binding was still strong enough to hold secrets. This notebook had once contained lesson plans and student grades. Now it would serve a different purpose. I started writing down everything. Every cruel word Melissa had said. Every scheme she'd tried. Every time she treated me like a burden instead of her father. My handwriting was still neat and precise, just like when I used to grade papers late into the night. Date, time, exact quotes. I'd learned from 40 years of teaching that documentation was everything. Students couldn't argue with facts written in black and white, and neither could manipulative daughters. Martha always said I was too trusting, too willing to see the good in people. But she also taught me to stand up for myself when it mattered. This notebook wasn't just a diary anymore. This was evidence. And if Melissa thought she could steamroll over me without consequences, she had another thing coming. I wrote until my hand cramped, then kept writing anyway. Sunday dinner was Melissa's idea. She cooked pot roast with all the fixings, acting sweeter than she'd been in months. The house filled with the smell of home cooking, reminding me of better times when she actually cared about my well-being. I should have known something was up. Halfway through the meal, she slid a paper across the table with my dessert, like it was just another part of the meal. "Just a formality, Dad. Sign here, and it'll make everything so much easier for both of us." I picked up the document and squinted at it, pretending I needed my reading glasses. The header said, "Transfer of property ownership," in bold legal letters. My house, my 40-year home where I'd raised my family, reduced to a legal document with signature lines. "Let me get my glasses from the bedroom," I said, standing slowly and making a show of being unsteady on my feet. While she waited in the kitchen, probably congratulating herself on her cleverness, I took out my phone and snapped clear photos of every page. The camera captured every clause, every condition, every way she planned to steal my home from me. Then I folded the papers and brought them back to the table, setting them down without signing anything. Mrs. Dunlap from next door knocked on my front door the next morning. She was holding a plate of fresh chocolate chip cookies, but her weathered face looked worried behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "Steve," I heard shouting last night. "Are you doing all right over here?" she asked, her voice filled with the kind of genuine concern I hadn't heard from my own daughter in years. For the first time in months, I told someone the truth. I explained about the cane, the documents, the plans to sell my house from under me. Mrs. Dunlap's eyes grew wider with each detail I shared. "I've seen her treat you poorly before," she said quietly, setting the cookies on my kitchen counter. "The way she yanked that cane away last week when you were trying to get your mail from the box. I almost came over then, but I didn't want to interfere. Now I had a witness. Someone who'd seen Melissa's cruelty with her own eyes. Someone who could testify to the pattern of abuse if it came to that. Would you be willing to testify if it came to that?" I asked, meeting her concerned gaze directly. She didn't hesitate. "Absolutely, Steve. What she's doing isn't right." Melissa thought she was clever, searching through my desk drawers when she thought I wasn't looking. I watched her from the hallway, rifling through my papers like a common thief looking for treasure. Her perfectly manicured nails clicked against the wooden drawer pulls as she searched. She was looking for my will, my bank statements, anything that would give her control over my affairs. What she didn't know was that all my important documents were locked in a fireproof cabinet in the basement, safe from her prying fingers. The key wasn't in any obvious place either. I'd hidden it inside a hollow chess piece from the set Martha and I used to play with on quiet Sunday afternoons. The White King, to be exact, carved from real ivory and weighted just right to hide a small key. Melissa could search all she wanted. She was looking in all the wrong places, getting more frustrated by the minute as she found nothing but old tax returns and utility bills. I smiled to myself, watching her slam drawers shut in anger. She thought she was 3 steps ahead of me, playing some sophisticated game of manipulation. But I was playing chess while she was playing checkers, and she didn't even realize the game had started. At my monthly checkup, Dr. Williams asked his usual questions about how I was managing at home. This time, instead of giving my usual polite answers about getting by just fine, I told him the truth about what was happening with Melissa. His expression grew serious as I described the incidents. The cane yanking, the pressure to sign documents, the threats about selling my house. He set down his clipboard and really listened, the way doctors used to do before everything became about rushing patients through the system. "Mr. Patterson, what you're describing sounds like elder abuse," he said, making careful notes in his chart. "Your safety and independence are paramount concerns here." He wrote out a formal assessment stating that I was mentally competent and physically capable of living independently. The document also noted that removing me from my home environment would be detrimental to my physical and mental health. I folded the note carefully and added it to my growing evidence file. Medical documentation would carry serious weight if this went to court, more weight than Melissa's claims about my declining abilities. The doctor asked if I wanted him to call Adult Protective Services, but I told him not yet. I had my own plan forming. When Melissa returned with another set of papers the following week, I decided to try a different approach. This time, instead of being evasive or confused, I agreed to sign them. I wanted to see how far her deception would go. Her face lit up like Christmas morning when I said yes. "Oh, Dad, you're making the right choice. This will be so much better for everyone involved." What she didn't realize was that I'd prepared for this moment. While she was getting a pen from the kitchen drawer, humming with satisfaction, I quickly swapped out the important pages with blank sheets of paper I'd cut to the same size. I signed the cover page with a flourish, making sure she saw my signature written clearly across the bottom. She practically glowed with satisfaction as she gathered up the documents, probably already spending my money in her mind. "There, wasn't that easy?" she said, kissing my forehead like I was a good child who'd finally learned to behave. My old colleague Frank Morrison had retired from teaching years ago and become a lawyer specializing in elder care issues. I called him up and asked if he'd like to visit for tea and catch up on old times, making it sound like nothing more than a social call. Melissa was there when he arrived, but she just saw an elderly man with a friendly smile and a slight stoop. She had no idea he was taking mental notes of everything he observed, cataloging every interaction between us. Over Earl Grey tea and shortbread cookies, I showed Frank my notebook, the photographs, and played him some of the recordings. His expression grew grimmer with each piece of evidence I presented. "Steve, this is ironclad documentation of elder abuse and attempted fraud," he whispered when Melissa was in the kitchen getting more hot water. "This could destroy her legally and financially if you decide to pursue it." I nodded, but I wasn't finished building my case yet. Legal protection was just the first step in what I had planned. I wanted Melissa to understand exactly how it felt to be powerless and humiliated, to have someone you trusted turn against you when you needed them most. Frank understood. He'd seen cases like this before, and he knew that sometimes the best defense was a strong offense. A few days later, Melissa showed up with my cane, setting it beside my chair like she was doing me a huge favor. The wooden shaft gleamed from polish, as if she'd taken special care to make it look presentable. "I thought you might want this back," she said in that sickeningly sweet voice she used when she wanted something. "I know how much you depend on it for getting around." But I could see the smirk hiding behind her fake smile, the little test she was running to see how I'd react. This was her way of checking if I'd grovel with gratitude, if I'd apologize for whatever imaginary offense she thought I'd committed. Instead, I picked up the cane silently and leaned it against my knee without a word of thanks. No groveling, no apology, no acknowledgement of her supposed generosity. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, and I could see it was making her uncomfortable. She shifted in her seat, waiting for me to say something, anything, that would give her back the control she was used to having. But I wasn't playing that role anymore. I wasn't the grateful, helpless old man she expected me to be. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and she could feel it even if she couldn't understand why. The next time Melissa came over for one of her tirades about my stubbornness and ingratitude, I made sure my phone was connected to Frank's office line before she arrived. He'd agreed to listen in as a witness to whatever she might say. She didn't disappoint my expectations. Within minutes of walking through the door, she was ranting about my stubbornness, my ingratitude, my refusal to see reason about my living situation. "I'll sell this place whether he cooperates or not," she declared, her voice rising with frustration. "He can crawl around a nursing home if he wants to be difficult about it. I'm done pretending to care about his feelings." On the other end of the line, Frank was hearing every word in crystal clear audio quality. By the time she finished her performance, we had her on record threatening to forcibly sell my home and expressing complete indifference to my well-being. After she left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, Frank called me back. "This is better than a signed confession," he told me, his voice filled with amazement. "She just incriminated herself completely, and she has no idea she did it." The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the perfect moment to spring it and watch her world collapse. The next week, Melissa tried to access my bank account using the debit card I'd given her years ago for legitimate emergencies. What she didn't know was that I'd already called the bank and changed all my access codes, passwords, and security questions the day after our conversation about selling the house. Her card was declined at the grocery store checkout when she tried to buy herself lunch. I know because Mrs. Henderson from down the street was standing behind her in line and told me all about the embarrassing scene later that afternoon. Melissa stormed into my house 20 minutes later, her face red with embarrassment and fury, her designer purse clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "Dad, what's wrong with your bank card?" It didn't work at the store, and I looked like an idiot in front of everyone. I looked up from my newspaper with the most innocent expression I could manage, adjusting my reading glasses for effect. "That's strange, dear. Maybe there's a problem with the bank's computer system. Have you tried using your own money instead?" The suggestion hit her like a physical slap. She wasn't used to paying for things herself, especially not when she could use my account as her personal piggy bank whenever she needed cash. Her mask of fake concern finally started to crack around the edges. I decided to invite some of my old teaching colleagues over for coffee and reminiscing about the good old days at Roosevelt High School. What I didn't tell Melissa was that they were coming on Tuesday at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She barged through my front door right on schedule, using her key without knocking, expecting to find me alone and vulnerable to her latest demands about signing paperwork. Instead, she walked into a living room full of 6 retired teachers, all of whom had known me for decades and remembered me as a respected colleague and friend. "Oh," she said, stopping short in the doorway like she'd walked into a brick wall. "I didn't know you had company, Dad." Before I could make proper introductions, she launched into her usual routine without considering her audience. "Dad, we really need to discuss your living situation. You're becoming a danger to yourself, and I can't keep worrying about you." Every person in that room heard the contempt in her voice, saw the way she spoke to her elderly father like he was an inconvenient child who couldn't manage his own affairs. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Margaret Walsh, my old department head, cleared her throat diplomatically. "Perhaps this conversation would be better saved for a private moment, dear." That evening, I decided to test just how cruel Melissa could be when she thought nobody was watching or judging her behavior. I pretended to stumble while walking from the kitchen to the living room, grabbing onto the wall for support and making soft sounds of distress. Instead of rushing to help me or showing any concern for my well-being, Melissa actually laughed out loud. "Really, Dad? You're going to play the helpless invalid card now? I'm not falling for that manipulation." What she didn't notice was my phone propped up on the bookshelf behind a picture frame, recording everything that happened. The camera captured her mocking me while I struggled to regain my balance, showing absolutely no concern for my safety. I managed to steady myself without falling, but the damage was done. Not to me, but to her reputation and character. That video would be devastating when the right people saw it at the right time. I uploaded the file to a secure cloud folder where Frank could access it whenever we needed it for legal proceedings. The evidence against Melissa was becoming overwhelming, building into an unstoppable case against her. But I wasn't ready to use it yet. I wanted to make sure I had everything I needed for total victory. I told Melissa that I'd been thinking seriously about updating my will, explaining that the old one was probably outdated after all these years of changes in tax laws and estate planning. Her eyes lit up like a slot machine hitting the jackpot, though she tried to hide her excitement behind a mask of appropriate concern. "That's very wise, Dad. These legal things should definitely be kept current." I gave her a copy of what appeared to be a draft of my new will, showing her as the sole beneficiary of my house, my savings account, my life insurance policy, everything I owned in the world. She tried to hide her excitement as she read through the document, but I could see her mentally spending the money already. "This looks very comprehensive," she said, trying to sound appropriately somber about inheriting from her father's death. What she didn't know was that the real will, the legally binding document that completely removed her as beneficiary and left everything to charity, was already filed and notarized with Frank's law firm. She spent the next few days acting unusually kind to me, probably afraid of doing anything that might make me change my mind about her inheritance. It was almost amusing to watch her sudden transformation into a caring daughter. 2 weeks later, there was an official knock at my door. A professional-looking woman in a navy business suit stood on my porch with an official clipboard and a badge identifying her as a government social worker. "Mr. Patterson? I'm Amanda Torres from Adult Protective Services. We received a report expressing concerns about your welfare and living situation." I invited her in, knowing exactly who had called them and why. Dr. Williams had kept his word about following up on my situation with the appropriate authorities. Melissa happened to be there that day, and she immediately went into damage control mode when she saw the official visitor. "Oh, there must be some mistake. I take excellent care of my father. He's perfectly safe here." But Amanda Torres was trained to spot the signs of elder abuse and manipulation. She noticed the faint bruises on my knees from when I'd fallen after Melissa took my cane away. She saw how nervous Melissa became under professional questioning. After Melissa left the room to get coffee, Amanda leaned closer to me and spoke in a confidential tone. "Mr. Patterson, you have more power in this situation than you might realize. Don't let anyone convince you that you're helpless or dependent. The law protects people like you." I decided it was time to go public with my story, at least within my immediate community. I organized a small neighborhood gathering in my backyard, just a casual get-together for people to socialize and enjoy the spring weather. Melissa showed up uninvited, furious to discover that I was socializing without her permission or supervision. She'd been trying to isolate me from my friends and neighbors for months, controlling who I could see and talk to. As we all sat around in lawn chairs sharing stories and catching up on neighborhood news, I began talking about the challenges that elderly people face in today's society, even from their own families. Sometimes, I said, looking directly at Melissa while addressing the group, the people who are supposed to care for you the most can be the ones who hurt you the deepest. I've heard terrible stories about adult children who yank canes away from their elderly parents and tell them to crawl on their knees. The gasps around the circle were audible. Everyone turned to look at Melissa, whose face had gone completely white as she realized I was talking about her. She couldn't storm off without making herself look even more guilty, so she sat there trapped while I continued telling my story to a captivated audience. The formal legal letter arrived by certified mail on a Thursday morning. Melissa had to sign for it personally at the post office, which meant she couldn't pretend she'd never received it or claim ignorance about its contents. Notice of disinheritance was printed in bold black letters across the top of the official legal document, along with Frank's law firm letterhead. She burst into my house an hour later, crumpling the letter in her fist, her carefully applied makeup smeared with tears of rage and disbelief. "You can't do this to me. I'm your only daughter. I'm your only family." I looked at her calmly from my comfortable chair, my cane resting against my knee like a symbol of the dignity she tried to take away from me. "I can do whatever I want with my own property and money, Melissa. That's what ownership means in this country. But I've been counting on that inheritance. I have plans. I have debts." "So did I replied quietly. I had plans for a daughter who would love and respect me in my final years. I had plans for family gatherings and grandchildren who knew their grandfather. We don't always get what we plan for." She threatened to contest the will, to claim I was mentally incompetent, to drag me through expensive court proceedings. But she didn't know there was much worse coming her way. The process server found Melissa at her workplace, delivering the court papers in front of her coworkers and customers during the busy lunch rush. Frank had timed it perfectly for maximum embarrassment and social impact. Elder abuse in the first degree, attempted fraud and financial exploitation, coercion of a vulnerable adult, conspiracy to commit theft. The charges were serious felonies, and the evidence supporting them was overwhelming. Every recording, every photograph, every witness statement was attached to the legal filing. That evening, Melissa called me screaming into the phone, her voice hoarse with panic and desperation. "How could you do this to me? I'm your daughter. Family doesn't destroy family like this. You stopped being my daughter the day you told me to crawl on my knees," I said quietly, my voice steady as stone. "Now you'll learn what it feels like to be powerless and afraid." I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. I was done listening to her excuses, her justifications, her attempts to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. The legal system would take over from here, and justice would finally be served. The video of Melissa mocking me while I struggled to stand went viral throughout our entire community and beyond. Mrs. Dunlap had shared it with her church group, who shared it with their friends and family on social media. Within days, everyone in town had seen exactly how cruel Melissa could be to her own father. The comments on the video were brutal, with people calling her heartless, selfish, evil, and much worse. She couldn't go to the grocery store, the post office, her workplace, or anywhere else without people staring and whispering behind her back. Her reputation was completely destroyed. She tried calling me repeatedly to beg me to take the video down, but I'd blocked her number. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it now. Sometimes the court of public opinion is harsher and more immediate than any legal judgment. Social media had turned her into a pariah overnight. Local news stations picked up the story, and suddenly my case became a symbol of elder abuse awareness throughout the region. The woman who'd told me to crawl was now the one groveling for forgiveness that would never come. At 2:30 in the morning, I heard desperate pounding on my front door that woke me from deep sleep. Through the peephole, I could see Melissa standing on my porch in her pajamas, her makeup smeared, her hair disheveled like she'd been pulling at it. "Dad, please," she called through the door, her voice cracking with desperation. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of it. We can work this out. I'll do anything." But even as she pleaded, I caught her looking past me into the house whenever I opened the door slightly, her eyes scanning for my important papers and documents on the table. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done to me. She was sorry she'd been caught and exposed. She was sorry her plan had backfired so spectacularly. I kept the chain lock engaged and spoke through the small crack in the door. "Good night, Melissa. Don't come back here again, or I'll call the police." I closed the door firmly and turned off the porch light, leaving her standing alone in the cold darkness. Some bridges, once burned completely, can never be rebuilt. Some trust, once shattered, can never be repaired. The courtroom was packed the day of the hearing. News of the elder abuse case had spread throughout our community and beyond, and people wanted to see justice served against someone who'd mistreated their vulnerable parent. I walked slowly to the witness stand, my cane firm in my hand, and told my story from beginning to end. Every detail, every humiliation, every moment of cruelty was laid out clearly for the judge and jury to hear. Frank presented the evidence methodically and professionally. The recordings where Melissa called me a burden. The photographs of forged documents. The witness statements from neighbors and friends. The medical documentation proving my competency. It was overwhelming and undeniable proof of systematic abuse and attempted fraud. Melissa sat at the defendant's table, shrinking smaller with each piece of evidence presented against her. Her expensive lawyer had advised her not to testify on her own behalf, knowing her words would only make things worse. When the judge asked if I felt safe continuing to live independently in my own home, I looked him straight in the eye and said yes with complete confidence. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, and Melissa's fate was sealed forever. 6 months later, I was tending to my vegetable garden when Mrs. Dunlap came over with fresh tomatoes from her plants. We stood chatting by my fence, watching the neighborhood children play in the street during their summer vacation. Melissa had left town immediately after the trial, unable to face the shame and social ostracism that followed her conviction for elder abuse. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved somewhere out west, starting over where nobody knew her story. My house was secure, my independence was intact, and my dignity was fully restored. The legal victory had cost Melissa everything she thought she was entitled to, but it had given me back my self-respect and peace of mind. I walked back to my porch, my cane steady and strong in my hand, and sat down in the same chair where I'd once felt so powerless and afraid. The same chair where my daughter had told me to crawl on my knees like an animal. But I was still walking tall and proud, and I intended to keep walking for as many years as God gave me. The evening sun felt warm on my face as I reflected on the journey from victim to victor. That's how you teach someone who thinks they can crush your spirit that some people are much stronger than they appear, and that respect must be earned, not demanded. Sometimes the student becomes the teacher, and the lesson lasts forever.